The thin blue line. The night was alive, a symphony of shadows and whispers, the air thick with a silence that screamed. Police officers, they see things, things that stay with them, things that claw at the edges of reality. This is one of those stories. The abandoned house. Officer Malone hated these calls. Old Victorian house, boarded windows, a history that hung heavy in the air. Kids dared each other to go inside. Tonight someone had. The door creaked open, a groan of rusty hinges. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of Malone's flashlight. The air was cold, unnaturally so. He took a step inside. The floorboards groaned in protest. A child's laughter echoed from the floor above. It was high-pitched. Wrong. Malone drew his weapon, his heart hammered against his ribs. "Police!" he called out, his voice echoing in the silence. A child's nightmare, the kind that leaves you breathless, heart-pounding and drenched in cold sweat. It was a night like no other, where shadows seemed to have a life of their own, and every creak of the floorboards echoed like a sinister whisper. Upstairs the laughter grew louder. It wasn't the kind of laughter that brought joy. No, this was different. It was twisted, almost inhuman, reverberating through the walls and sending shivers down Malone's spine. It was laced with a madness that sent chills down Malone's spine. He could feel the cold sweat forming on his brow, his heart racing as he tried to make sense of the eerie sounds. The wind outside howled, adding to the sense of dread that enveloped him. He reached the top of the stairs, his hand trembling on the banister. Each step felt like an eternity, the wooden stairs creaking under his weight, as if warning him to turn back, but he couldn't. He had to know what was behind that laughter. The laughter was coming from the room at the end of the hall. The door stood there, slightly ajar, almost inviting him in. The dim light from within cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the hallway seem even more foreboding. The door was slightly ajar. Light flickered from within, dancing shadows. They seemed to move with a life of their own, creating grotesque shapes that played tricks on his mind. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Malone pushed the door open. The laughter stopped. The sudden silence was deafening, pressing down on him like a weight. He hesitated for a moment, his hand still on the door, before stepping inside. In the center of the room, a rocking chair creaked back and forth. Empty. It moved as if an invisible force was pushing it, the rhythmic creaking adding to the eerie atmosphere. Malone's eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of life. He shined his light into the shadows, searching for the source of the chilling laughter. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but empty corners and dust-covered furniture. Yet the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Nothing. Then he saw it. A glint of something on the wall caught his eye. He moved closer, his breath hitching as he realized what it was. Scrawled on the wall in what looked like blood, a single sentence. "He's coming for you." The words seemed to pulse with a life of their own, the crimson letters stark against the peeling wallpaper. The hair on the back of Malone's neck stood on end. He could feel the icy fingers of fear gripping his heart, each beat echoing in his ears like a drum. He backed out of the room, his blood turning to ice. The sense of dread was overwhelming, and he knew he had to get out of there. But as he turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching him. The Shadow Man. Months later, Malone still couldn't shake the feeling of dread. He'd requested a transfer, couldn't stomach another night in that house. Now he patrolled a different beat, but the fear, it lingered. One night a call came in. A man fitting Malone's description had been seen breaking into a house, the same house. Malone sped towards the location, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew, somehow, that this was it. As he pulled up to the house, he saw him. A tall, shadowy figure standing on the porch. The figure turned, and for a brief moment their eyes met. Malone's blood ran cold. The figure's eyes were empty, soulless. Another call. The figure vanished into the night. Malone searched but found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there, except for Malone's chilling certainty that he wasn't alone. He never spoke of that night, not to anyone. He buried the memory deep, but it lingered. A shadow in the corner of his eye, a whisper in the dead of night. It was a secret he carried, a secret that gnawed at his sanity. Then came the second story. The highway disappearance. Officer Davies looked out at the seemingly endless highway. The road stretched out before her, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desolate desert landscape. It was a place where the line between reality and illusion often blurred, especially under the cover of night. The desert night was alive with strange sounds. The wind whispered through the sparse vegetation, carrying with it the distant howls of coyotes and the rustling of unseen creatures. It was an eerie symphony that set the stage for the mystery that was about to unfold, a place where shadows danced and reality seemed to bend. The moon cast long, twisted shadows that seemed to move of their own accord, creating an unsettling atmosphere. It was as if the desert itself was alive, watching, waiting. She'd been called to investigate a strange occurrence, a car, abandoned, engine still running, no driver. The call had come in just after midnight, a time when the desert was at its most mysterious. The dispatcher's voice had been tense, hinting at the oddity of the situation. The car sat in the middle of the highway, bathed in the harsh glare of the patrol car's headlights. It was an unusual sight, a lone vehicle in the vast emptiness, its presence both out of place and deeply unsettling. It was a late-model sedan, unremarkable except for the fact that it was completely empty. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of what might have happened to the driver. It was as if the car had simply been left there, abandoned in the middle of nowhere. Davies approached cautiously, her hand resting on her holster. Every step was measured, her senses on high alert. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft crunch of gravel under her boots. The driver's side door was ajar. Davies peered inside. The interior was dimly lit by the overhead light, casting a pale glow over the empty seats. She scanned the area, looking for any clues that might explain the bizarre scene. The keys were still in the ignition. It was a small detail, but one that added to the mystery. Why would someone leave their car running in the middle of the highway? A half-eaten burger lay on the passenger seat. It was as if the driver had been interrupted in the middle of their meal, forced to leave in a hurry. The sight of the food, left to grow cold, added a human element to the strange tableau. The engine was ticking, cooling down from its recent use. The sound was a reminder that not long ago someone had been here driving this car, but now they were gone, leaving behind only questions. It was as if the driver had simply vanished into thin air. The empty highway stretched out in both directions, offering no clues, no answers, just the endless road and the mystery of the highway disappearance. Whispers in the dark. Days turned into weeks. The investigation went nowhere. The missing driver was never found. Davies, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She started having nightmares, whispers in the dark, a feeling of being watched. One night, driving home after a late shift, she saw it, the same car, same model, same colour. It sped past her in the opposite direction. Davies slammed on the brakes, her heart pounding. She pulled a U-turn, the tyres screaming in protest. The car was gone. She scanned the highway, her pulse quickening. Empty, except for a single flickering light in the distance. A lone gas station, miles from civilization. Davies felt a chill run down her spine. She had to investigate. No explanation. The gas station was deserted. Not a single car in sight, not a soul to be seen. The pumps stood like silent sentinels, their hoses hanging limp and lifeless. The only sound was the distant hum of the highway, a reminder of the world that continued to move on, oblivious to the eerie stillness that had settled over this place. The flickering light cast long, eerie shadows. Each flicker seemed to bring the darkness closer, as if the night itself was alive and watching. The shadows danced and twisted, creating shapes that seemed almost human, but not quite. It was as if the light was trying to reveal something hidden, something that didn't belong in this world. Davies stepped out of her car, her hand hovering over her weapon. She had been a police officer for over a decade, but something about this place set her nerves on edge. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the air was thick with tension. The air was deathly still. Not a single leaf rustled, not a single insect chirped. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The silence was oppressive, pressing down on her like a physical weight. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat echoing in the stillness. Not even the wind dared to whistle through the empty pumps. It was as if the very air was afraid to move, afraid to disturb whatever lay hidden in the shadows. The stillness was unnatural, a stark contrast to the chaos and noise of the city she was used to. It was as if this place existed in a different reality, one where time stood still and the rules of the world no longer applied. As she approached the station, she heard it, a low hum, coming from inside. It was a sound that didn't belong, a sound that sent a chill down her spine. It was faint at first, barely audible over the pounding of her heart, but it grew louder with each step she took. It was a sound that seemed to resonate with the very core of her being, a sound that spoke of things best left forgotten. It was a sound that sent shivers down her spine, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a sound that spoke of ancient things, things that had no place in the modern world. It was a sound that made her want to turn and run, but she knew she couldn't. She had a job to do, and she couldn't let fear stop her. A sound that spoke of something ancient and evil, something that had been waiting in the darkness for a very long time. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate in her bones, a sound that made her feel small and insignificant. It was a sound that made her question everything she thought she knew about the world. Davies drew her weapon, her finger on the trigger. She had faced danger before, but this was different. This was something she couldn't explain, something that defied logic and reason. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had to stay focused, had to stay in control. She pushed open the door to the gas station, her heart pounding in her chest. The humming grew louder. It was a sound that seemed to fill the entire building, a sound that made her feel like she was walking into a nightmare. She could feel the vibrations in the floor, in the walls, in her very bones. It was a sound that seemed to be alive, a sound that seemed to be calling to her. It seemed to vibrate in her bones. It was a sensation that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. She could feel it in every fiber of her being, a pulsing, throbbing energy that seemed to be drawing her in. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the air was thick with tension. She could feel her heart racing, her palms sweating, but she forced herself to keep moving forward. And then she saw it, a figure standing behind the counter. It was bathed in the sickly light of a single fluorescent bulb, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. It was a sight that made her blood run cold, a sight that made her question her own sanity. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. But she forced herself to stay calm. Standing behind the counter, bathed in the sickly light of a single fluorescent bulb, was a figure. It was a sight that seemed to come straight out of a nightmare, a sight that made her question everything she thought she knew about the world. The figure was still, almost unnaturally so, and it seemed to be watching her with eyes that were both empty and full of malice. The figure turned, and Davies gasped. It was the missing driver. His eyes were vacant, devoid of any emotion or recognition. It was as if he was no longer human, as if he had become something else entirely. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. It was the missing driver. His eyes were vacant. They were like dark, empty voids, devoid of any life or emotion. It was a sight that made her blood run cold, a sight that made her question everything she thought she knew about the world. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. His skin was pale and drawn, and he was smiling. It was a smile that was both chilling and unnatural, a smile that seemed to belong to something other than a human being. It was a smile that made her feel small and insignificant, a smile that made her question everything she thought she knew about the world. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. A slow, predatory grin that spread across his face like a crack in a porcelain mask. It was a sight that made her blood run cold, a sight that made her question everything she thought she knew about the world. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. Before Davies could react, the figure lunged. It was a movement that was both sudden and terrifying, a movement that seemed to defy the laws of physics. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had to stay focused, had to stay in control. She had to survive. Conclusion: The Unseen World. The stories of Officer Malone and Officer Davies remain unsolved. They serve as chilling reminders that some things cannot be explained, that there are forces at work in the world lurking just beyond the veil of reality that we can barely comprehend. Forces that can shatter our sanity and leave us questioning everything we thought we knew. The next time you find yourself alone in the dark, listen closely. You might just hear the whispers of the unseen world, the whispers of the things that